Commander Vexera stood on the bridge of the Dominion warship Inevitable Conquest, her towering 9-foot frame casting a long shadow across the polished obsidian floor. 3 pairs of amber eyes scanned the tactical display where a small human vessel blinked red, caught trespassing in Raxian-controlled space. Primitive design, she noted, her voice a low rumble that vibrated through the command deck. Interesting that they would venture so far from their territories. Her first officer, Lieutenant Zal, approached with practiced caution. Orders, Commander. Disable their engines and bring them aboard. I want to understand what would drive these fragile creatures to such boldness. The tractor beam engaged, pulling the human ship into the vast docking bay. Vexera adjusted her ceremonial armor, plates of iridescent metal that marked her 20 successful campaigns. The humans would understand immediately that they faced no ordinary officer, but a warlord whose name was whispered with fear across 3 galactic sectors. When Vexera entered the holding area, the captured humans pressed themselves against the far wall. 15 of them, various shapes and sizes, but all so small and soft-looking compared to her species. Their fear scent was pungent, almost overwhelming her sensitive receptors. All except one. A male human stepped forward, shorter than most of his companions but standing straight. Blood, red, so strange, stained his hands and the front of his white garment. I'm Theo Reed, civilian medical officer, he said, voice barely wavering. Some of our crew are injured and need immediate attention. Vexera tilted her head, her central eyes narrowing while her peripheral pairs assessed the group. Your vessel violated sovereign Raxian space. By law, you are all prisoners awaiting interrogation. I understand, Theo said, but medical need transcends political boundaries. Even in war, the wounded have rights. A bold claim. Vexera moved closer, towering over the human who barely reached her thoracic plating. To his credit, he didn't flinch. Show me these injured, she commanded. Theo turned, revealing 3 humans on makeshift stretchers. Their wounds appeared consistent with the emergency evasive maneuvers her gunners reported during capture. Vexera activated her communicator. Send medical drones to holding area 3. Thank you, Theo said, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Don't mistake practical necessity for mercy, human. Dead prisoners tell no tales. The human's face performed a complex series of muscle movements. You could have killed us all immediately. You didn't. That tells me something about you, Commander. Vexera's secondary hearts quickened, with irritation, surely. What would that be? That you're curious. And curiosity is the foundation of understanding. Before she could respond, the medical drones arrived. Vexera watched as Theo directed them with surprising authority, demonstrating knowledge of xenobiology by adjusting their settings for human physiology. You've encountered our technology before, she observed. Theo nodded while stabilizing a crewmate's bleeding limb. I've studied comparative medicine for 15 years. Your medical systems are elegant, designed for efficiency rather than comfort, but remarkably adaptable. His hands moved with practiced precision, small yet capable. Vexera found herself watching longer than necessary, analyzing this contradiction, a physically unimpressive specimen displaying such competence and courage. You will be questioned once your patients are stable, she finally said. Prepare yourself. As she turned to leave, Theo spoke again. Commander, may I request quarantine protocols? Our species may carry pathogens harmless to us but potentially dangerous to yours. Vexera paused at the door. How interesting that this captured enemy would concern himself with her crew's well-being. Granted, she said, surprising herself. Lieutenant Zal will arrange appropriate containment. Walking back to the bridge, Vexera contemplated the strange encounter. In 20 years of military service, she had captured countless aliens, but none had looked at her 3 set eyes without terror. None had spoken of rights and understanding while bleeding on her pristine holding cell floor. Perhaps these humans possessed resources beyond physical strength or technological advancement. Perhaps there was more to learn here than simple intelligence gathering. For the first time in many cycles, Commander Vexera felt genuinely curious about a conquered species. 3 standard cycles had passed since the human vessel's capture. Commander Vexera stood at the observation window of the quarantine section, watching the medical crisis unfold. A mysterious illness had spread through the lower decks. 37 crew members now lay in isolation, their normally lustrous scales dulled with fever. The pathogen resists our standard protocols, reported Chief Medical Officer Drav, her lateral fins flaring with frustration. It appears to target our respiratory membranes specifically. Vexera's outer eyes focused on the suffering crew while her center pair remained fixed on the medical readouts. Origin? Unknown, Commander. But... Drav hesitated, mandibles clicking nervously. The timing suggests it may have originated from the human vessel. Vexera had considered this possibility. If true, the humans had brought disease to her ship, whether by accident or design remained to be determined. "Bring the medical officer to me," she ordered. The one called Theo. When the guards escorted Theo to the observation deck, Vexera noticed the dark circles under his eyes. He'd been treating his own people continuously since their capture. "Your crew is ill," he stated before she could speak, clearly having observed the medical bay below. "Those symptoms, labored breathing, scale discoloration, they're similar to a bacterial infection I've seen in other species with similar biology to yours." Vexera's crest rose in surprise. "You recognize this condition?" "Not exactly the same, but similar enough. On Earth, we've documented cross-species infections when different biological systems interact for the first time." He stepped closer to the glass. "I might be able to help if you'll let me examine them." "You suggest I allow a prisoner to treat my warriors? Perhaps hasten their demise?" Theo turned to face her directly. "Commander, if I wanted to harm your crew, I wouldn't need to be in the same room with them. If this came from us, it's an accidental contamination, exactly what I warned about when requesting quarantine." His logic was sound, though trusting him contradicted every protocol. Yet watching her crew suffer while medical officers struggled helplessly stirred something uncomfortable in Vexera's secondary heart chamber. "What would you require?" she asked finally. "Access to your medical database, samples from the patients, and your laboratory equipment." He paused. "And trust, Commander. Without that, none of the rest matters." 6 hours later, Vexera watched Theo work alongside Drav in the containment lab. His small hands moved with remarkable precision, manipulating equipment designed for much larger appendages. Occasionally he would explain something to Drav, who initially bristled at instruction from a human but gradually began responding with professional interest. "Commander," Theo called through the communication system, "we've identified the pathogen. It's a bacteria common to humans but harmless to us. Our immune systems evolved alongside it. Your crew has no natural defenses. Can it be treated?" "Yes. I've modified one of your broad-spectrum antibacterials to target its specific protein structure. We should begin immediate treatment, starting with Lieutenant Zal. His condition is most critical." Vexera's middle hearts clenched. Zal had served with her for 15 campaigns. "Proceed." The next 12 hours blurred together as Theo worked without rest, administering the modified treatment and monitoring responses. Vexera remained on the observation deck, canceling all other appointments. When Zal's vital signs finally stabilized, she released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He'll recover fully," Theo announced, exhaustion evident in his voice as he slumped against a wall. "The others are responding well too. The treatment is working." Vexera observed this small human who had just saved her most trusted officer. "You require rest," she stated. I'll rest when all patients are stable, he replied, though his eyes were already closing. Making a decision that would have shocked her superiors, Vexera entered the containment area personally. She approached Theo, who barely managed to stand at her arrival. You have proven yourself valuable, Theo Reed, she said formally. The Raxian Empire acknowledges this service. A tired smile crossed his face. Just doing my job, Commander. Your job saved 37 lives today, including one I consider irreplaceable. She gestured to a recovery pod. Rest. That is an order. My medical staff can follow your protocols now. To her surprise, Theo reached out and briefly touched her armored forearm, a gesture that would have earned any other prisoner immediate restraint. They're good people, your crew. Dedicated. Reminds me of home. As he finally succumbed to exhaustion in the recovery pod, Vexera found herself pondering his words. Good people. Not fearsome warriors or superior beings, just people. She watched his small chest rise and fall with each breath, so fragile compared to her species, yet he had confronted death on behalf of those who had captured him. Perhaps, she thought as she returned to the bridge, there was more to learn from these humans than simple interrogation could reveal. The medical bay had become an unlikely neutral ground aboard the inevitable conquest. For weeks after the outbreak, Commander Vexera found herself making daily visits that extended far beyond necessary supervision. Today, she watched Theo instructing junior Raxian medics on human physiology. His audience, once skeptical, now leaned forward with genuine interest as he explained the peculiarities of human cardiovascular systems. Two-chambered hearts, Lieutenant Mrek commented, so inefficient. How do you manage high-stress activities? We compensate with higher red blood cell counts, Theo answered, sketching a diagram on the medical display. Different evolutionary paths, same destination. Your species developed multiple hearts, we developed more efficient oxygen carriers. Vexera noted how he presented human biology without defensiveness or apology, simply as an alternative solution to survival. It was refreshing compared to the usual hierarchical thinking of species classification. When the lesson concluded, she gestured for Theo to join her. His status had evolved from prisoner to something unprecedented, consultant, perhaps. She had approved his transfer from detention quarters to medical staff housing, a decision that raised eyebrows among her officers. Your crew learns quickly, he remarked as they walked the curved corridor. Especially Mrek, she has a natural aptitude for comparative medicine. The Raxian Empire values adaptability, Vexera responded. Though we typically apply it to military strategy rather than medical exchange. Theo smiled, that peculiar human expression she had initially found unsettling but now recognized as genuine. Maybe they're not so different. Both require understanding your environment and responding appropriately. They reached the observation deck, now empty during third shift. The vast window revealed countless stars, including the distant sun that warmed Theo's homeworld. Tell me about Earth, Vexera requested, settling her massive frame onto a reinforced bench. Not the strategic information in our databases, but what you value about it. Theo considered this, his small form reflected in the polished floor. It's beautifully contradictory. Oceans that can be peaceful one moment and violent the next. Deserts beside rainforests. People with completely different beliefs living as neighbors. He paused. Imperfect, but constantly striving. Your species embraces contradiction, Vexera observed. Ours seeks to eliminate it. Is that why the Raxian military expansion has been so thorough? A bold question that would have earned punishment weeks earlier. Now, Vexera found herself answering honestly. We value harmony through uniformity. Different approaches create friction. Friction leads to conflict. She extended her massive hand, 3 times larger than his. Our history taught us that difference equals danger. Yet here we are, Theo noted, different in almost every way, having a conversation instead of a conflict. An anomaly, she admitted. Or an evolution. Vexera's central eyes focused on him with new intensity. You believe systems can change their fundamental nature? I believe adaptation is the most fundamental nature of all living systems. Theo reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. Here, I've been saving this to show you. In his palm sat a small metal disc. Vexera's scanning eyes identified earth metals, crude but intentionally crafted. This was my grandfather's compass, Theo explained. Ancient technology by your standards, it simply points north using magnetic fields. He was a doctor too, but in war zones. He told me that even when everything else changed, borders, allies, enemies, the compass remained constant, helping him find his way to those who needed help. Vexera carefully took the tiny object, amazed that something so primitive could carry such significance. Your grandfather fought enemies yet healed them? He didn't see enemies on his operating table, Theo said quietly. Just people who needed his skills. They sat in silence, watching distant stars. Vexera contemplated how strange it was to find wisdom in a species her empire classified as barely worth studying before conquest. Tomorrow, she said finally, I will show you something of my world. The following day, Vexera brought Theo to her private quarters, an unprecedented honor for a non-Raxian. The room was austere by human standards, but one wall displayed a series of intricate crystal formations. Memory crystals, she explained. Each contains the recorded consciousness of an ancestor. In Raxian tradition, we carry our history within us, literally. Theo approached them with appropriate reverence. You can access their memories? During specific ceremonies, yes. This one, she indicated a particularly complex formation, contains my maternal ancestor who commanded the first Raxian space expedition. Her discoveries shaped our understanding of interspecies contact. What did she discover? Vexera's outer eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep consideration. That difference need not mean threat. A lesson our empire later reinterpreted. She carefully removed the crystal from its housing and held it between them. This is not permitted, but I believe it necessary. Place your hand here. When Theo touched the crystal alongside her massive clawed hand, a soft glow emanated from within. No human had ever connected to Raxian ancestral memory, but Vexera had calculated that the crystal's neural interface might translate across species. For a brief moment, they both experienced the wonder of first contact through her ancestor's consciousness, the mixture of fear and exhilaration, the moment of choosing understanding over aggression. When the connection faded, Theo stepped back, visibly moved. She was like you, curious beneath the caution. Perhaps that trait persists despite our evolution toward conquest. Vexera returned the crystal to its place. There are those in our government who believe our current path is unsustainable. Rebels? Reformers, she corrected. Though they lack significant influence. As they continued sharing cultural insights, Raxian communal raising practices, human family structures, art forms and scientific methods, Vexera recognized something unprecedented forming between them. Not merely tolerance or diplomatic necessity, but genuine connection. When her communication device chimed with the imperial signal, this moment of cultural exchange abruptly ended. The message was clear, the Dominion fleet had identified another human settlement within striking distance. All senior officers were to prepare battle strategies immediately. Vexera watched Theo's expression as he recognized the military alert sequence. In his eyes, she saw the question he dared not ask: would their newfound understanding mean anything when faced with imperial orders? She had no answer to give him as she escorted him back to the medical bay in silence. The war room of the inevitable conquest hummed with tactical preparations. Three-dimensional projections showed the human settlement, a mining colony on a resource-rich moon orbiting a gas giant. Intelligence indicated minimal defenses, approximately 2,000 civilians, and resources valuable to the Empire. Standard conquest protocol, Lieutenant Zal was saying, his scales now fully recovered from the illness. Disable communications, neutralize defensive capabilities, establish ground control within 6 hours. Commander Vexera studied the holographic display, her central eyes fixed on the settlement's layout while her peripheral pairs scanned her officers' expressions. They awaited her approval of the battle plan, a formality she had never hesitated to provide in previous campaigns. Projected casualties, she asked, her voice neutral. Minimal for our forces, Zal replied. For the humans, perhaps 30% in the initial assault. More if they resist ground forces. 600 humans. The number shouldn't have troubled her. Vexera had authorized far greater losses in previous conquests, all justified by imperial expansion. Yet now, unbidden, individual human faces appeared in her mind, not just Theo, but the injured crew members she had come to recognize during her medical bay visits. Commander? Zal prompted when she remained silent. I require additional intelligence, she said finally. Prepare the assault plan but delay execution until my authorization. Her officers exchanged glances but knew better than to question her directly. As they filed out, Zal remained behind. Permission to speak freely, Commander? Granted. The human medic has affected your judgment. Vexera's crest flared momentarily, a reflexive response to challenge. You believe I've been compromised, Lieutenant? I believe you've been influenced. As have I. Zal touched the scale patterns on his neck, where the bacterial infection had nearly claimed his life. I owe my existence to Theo Reed. However, our personal debts cannot override imperial directive. Is conquest the only directive worth following? The question emerged before she could contain it, borderline seditious by imperial standards. Zal's eyes widened slightly. Commander, such questions are necessary for effective leadership, she finished firmly. Dismissed, Lieutenant. Alone in the war room, Vexera accessed restricted files on human resistance patterns. Previous encounters had shown them to be surprisingly resilient despite their physical limitations. They protected their young with remarkable ferocity and demonstrated innovative tactics when conventional defense failed. Her communication panel chimed, a message from medical requesting her presence. When she arrived, Theo was treating a young Raxian engineer for plasma burns. Commander, he acknowledged without looking up from his work. I'll be finished shortly. She watched him apply regenerative compounds to the injured scales, his movements confident despite the anatomical differences. The young engineer remained still, trusting this alien with her healing. When Theo completed the treatment, he instructed the engineer in proper care protocols before sending her back to duty. Only then did he turn to Vexera, his expression uncharacteristically tense. The crew is discussing the upcoming assault, he said without preamble. Is it true? Another human settlement? Vexera considered deflection but found herself unwilling to dissemble. Yes. Civilians? Primarily. Theo's hands clenched. Vexera, you can't. I am bound by Imperial command, she interrupted, though the words felt hollow. The Raxian Dominion requires the resources that Moon provides. Resources can be negotiated. Trade established. There are alternatives to slaughter. His voice rose, drawing attention from nearby medical staff. Vexera guided him to a private consultation room, where his controlled demeanor finally fractured. These past weeks, he said, voice trembling with emotion, I believed I was seeing a change, in you, in how your crew views humans. Was I deluding myself? Are we still just targets to be conquered? Vexera felt her secondary hearts beating out of rhythm. What would you have me do? Defy direct orders? Risk my ship and crew to spare strangers? They're not strangers to me, Theo said quietly. The colony you're targeting, Unity Basin, I trained their medical staff 2 years ago. Dr. Patel. Nurse Domingo. Researchers building vaccines for frontier diseases. He met her three-set gaze directly. People, Vexera. Just like your crew. Just like us. The room fell silent except for the hum of medical equipment. Vexera had conquered dozens of outposts without considering the individual lives within them. Statistics, not beings with names and purposes. Show me, she finally said. What? Show me these people you know. Help me understand what you're asking me to risk my career, possibly my life, to preserve. Theo accessed a terminal, pulling up personal files the Empire had failed to obtain in their intelligence gathering. Images appeared, humans of various ages working together to establish the colony. Medical facilities. Hydroponics gardens. Children learning in makeshift classrooms. Unity Basin was established as a scientific outpost, Theo explained. They mine resources, yes, but primarily to support research on sustainable colonization. They're developing methods that could benefit any species attempting to settle challenging environments. Vexera studied the images, noting the similarities to Raxian colonial efforts from centuries past, before military conquest became the preferred method of expansion. Your people could learn from them, Theo continued. Trade technology instead of taking it. Both species would benefit. The Empire does not collaborate with potential rivals. Then the Empire will eventually face unified resistance, Theo countered. How many species can you subjugate before they ally against you? How sustainable is conquest compared to cooperation? His words echoed unsettlingly close to discussions Vexera had heard among the Reform faction, conversations quickly silenced when ranking officials appeared. Her communication device signaled, the fleet admiral requesting confirmation of attack coordinates. Time had run out. I need to return to the bridge, she said, moving toward the door. Theo stepped into her path, a physically futile gesture given their size difference, yet profoundly affecting. Vexera, please. You've seen another way is possible. We've proven it here, on this ship. For a moment, Commander Vexera stood perfectly still, her 3 hearts beating in rare synchronization. 20 years of military service balanced against 4 weeks of transformation. Her career, reputation, and survival weighed against an emerging conviction that the Empire's path led ultimately to destruction rather than glory. If I consider alternatives, she said carefully, I would need substantial evidence that cooperation offers superior strategic advantage. Hope flickered across Theo's face. I can help provide that. Return to your quarters, she ordered. I will summon you if necessary. As Vexera walked to the bridge, her mind calculated possibilities and consequences with military precision. The decision awaiting her would ripple across both their species, and perhaps reshape her own understanding of what it meant to truly conquer. The bridge fell silent as Commander Vexera delivered her decision. We will not attack the human settlement. Her officers stared in disbelief. Lieutenant Zal stepped forward cautiously. Commander, Imperial Command expects. Imperial Command lacks critical information, Vexera interrupted, her voice carrying the authority that had earned her 20 successful campaigns. I am initiating Protocol 27. Protocol 27, rarely invoked and known to few outside High Command, granted field commanders discretion to pursue alternative conquest strategies when standard protocols threatened mission success. It was intended for tactical flexibility, not the redirection Vexera now proposed, but the regulation existed nonetheless. Lieutenant Zal, open a secure channel to Unity Basin. Lieutenant Mrek, prepare a comprehensive proposal for scientific exchange. The rest of you, maintain battle-ready status but stand down weapons systems. As her crew moved to execute orders with practiced efficiency despite their confusion, Vexera summoned Theo to the bridge, an unprecedented breach of security protocols that emphasized the extraordinary circumstances. When he arrived, his expression shifted from apprehension to cautious hope as he observed the non-aggressive posture of the command crew. "You're contacting the colony instead of attacking," he stated, understanding immediately. "I am pursuing an experimental strategy," Vexera corrected, mindful of the official log recording every word. "The success of which requires your expertise." Within hours, the leaders of Unity Basin were in communication with the inevitable conquest. Initial terror gave way to wary negotiation as Theo helped bridge the vast cultural divide. Vexera presented the proposal not as mercy but as mutual opportunity, scientific exchange, limited resource sharing, and a pilot program for cooperative development. "This arrangement benefits both our peoples," she explained to Dr. Patel, the colony's director. "Your research advances our understanding of sustainable colonization. Our protection ensures your security from other threats in this sector." By the third day of negotiations, a tentative agreement had formed, one that would allow both the colony and Vexera to claim victory while avoiding bloodshed. The colonists would gain Raxian defensive technology and safe passage rights. The Empire would receive resource allocations and access to human adaptive research. As Vexera signed the final document, she was acutely aware of the greater challenge ahead, explaining this unorthodox conquest to Imperial command. That confrontation came sooner than expected. Commander Vexera, the holographic image of Admiral Krovax, loomed large in the war room, his elaborate rank markings gleaming even through the projection. "Your report describes a negotiated settlement rather than a conquest. Explain this deviation." Vexera stood at perfect attention, her posture betraying none of the strain she felt. "Admiral, Protocol 27 permits tactical innovation when standard approach threatens long-term objectives. I discovered intelligence suggesting Unity Basin possesses research valuable to Raxian expansion, research that would be lost in conventional conquest. You expect me to believe this decision was purely strategic?" The Admiral's tertiary eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Reports indicate unusual integration of human personnel aboard your vessel. The human medic proved useful during an outbreak that threatened my crew," Vexera stated. "I utilized his expertise, as any commander would employ available resources." Admiral Krovax studied her for several uncomfortable moments. "The Imperial Council is divided on your actions, Commander. Some call for your immediate removal. Others see potential in this experiment. And you, Admiral? I find myself curious about results." His massive form shifted. "You have one planetary cycle to demonstrate the value of this approach. If unsuccessful, you will execute standard conquest protocols, and face consequences for the delay." "Understood, Admiral." When the transmission ended, Vexera allowed herself a moment of weakness, leaning against the tactical display. The gamble was far from won. A chime at the door announced Theo. "The colony's first data transmission arrived," he said, entering with uncharacteristic excitement. "Their adaptive agriculture techniques show remarkable compatibility with Raxian biological needs. Dr. Patel believes your world's soil erosion issues could be addressed using modified versions of their methods." Vexera accepted the data tablet, scanning the preliminary findings. This information would typically take years to extract and implement through conventional conquest. "Cooperation multiplies knowledge," Theo said simply. The medical team found similar synergies. "Your regenerative compounds accelerate human healing by 37%, while our immunotherapy approaches offer solutions to 3 chronic Raxian conditions." For the first time in her military career, Vexera felt something beyond the satisfaction of successful conquest, the potential of creation rather than subjugation. "We have one cycle to prove this approach superior," she informed him. Admiral Krovax remained skeptical. Theo's expression hardened with determination. Then we'll need to accelerate the integration. I've spoken with Lieutenant Mrek, she's willing to lead a medical exchange team. That would place Raxians under human authority on the colony. Yes, and humans under Raxian supervision here. Equal vulnerability creates equal trust. Over the following weeks, the experiment expanded beyond original parameters. 6 Raxian specialists traveled to Unity Basin, while human scientists joined departments aboard the inevitable Conquest. Both sides maintained security protocols, but genuine collaboration emerged nonetheless. Vexera found herself in the peculiar position of defending human perspectives to her officers while Theo advocated for Raxian concerns to the colonists. They had become unlikely bridges between worlds that had only known conflict. When Admiral Krovax's evaluative transmission arrived precisely 1 cycle later, Vexera stood confidently beside representatives from both species. "Admiral," she began, "I present conclusive evidence of strategic advantage through cooperative approach." She transmitted the comprehensive data, resource yields exceeding projected conquest acquisition by 23%, technological advancements accelerated through combined research, and defensive capabilities enhanced through integrated systems. The Admiral reviewed the information with inscrutable expression. "These results are compelling, Commander. However, the Imperial Council questions whether this precedent undermines our fundamental doctrine of Raxian supremacy." "With respect, Admiral," Vexera responded, "supremacy is demonstrated not through destruction but through adaptation. The Empire has always evolved to overcome new challenges. This represents evolution of our conquest methodology." A calculating silence followed before the Admiral spoke again. "Your experiment will continue under observation. 2 additional Raxian vessels will join your position, officially to implement your protocols on wider scale, unofficially to ensure your continued loyalty." "I understand, Admiral." After the transmission ended, celebrations erupted throughout both the ship and colony. Vexera found Theo on the observation deck, looking at the stars that seemed somehow different now. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" he asked quietly. "For this sector, yes," she acknowledged. "For the Empire as a whole, change will come more slowly." "But it will come," he insisted. "Your reform faction now has evidence their approach can succeed." Vexera's outer eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture of thoughtful consideration. "Perhaps. Though we remain surrounded by those who see cooperation as weakness. Then we'll continue proving them wrong." Theo offered her the small compass he had shown her weeks before. "My grandfather would want you to have this. Someone who can find their way when everything around them changes." Vexera carefully took the tiny human artifact, now carrying significance far beyond its simple function. "I remain a commander of the Raxian Empire," she reminded him. "Yes," Theo agreed with a smile, "but now you're also something else, an ambassador of possibility." As they stood together watching the colony's lights below and stars above, Commander Vexera recognized the truth in his words. She had spent her career conquering worlds, but this tenuous bridge between different species, might be her most significant conquest yet. Not of territory, but of perspective. Not through dominance, but through connection. The towering alien warlord looked down at the small human beside her and, for the first time in her life, felt the unique peace of finding an equal in the most unexpected form. The stars above them held countless worlds waiting to learn whether their example would become exception or new doctrine. Either way, something irreversible had begun.